confiscate their passports so they couldn't go home. You know, there were just so many bad things that were happening to other African people. And it really used to affect me a lot, you know, so much so that I began to have mental health issues, you know, because I just could not take how badly other Africans were being treated, you know, because there was a sense of community amongst us as Africans in a bus or in a train.
That would help if I'm having my microphone actually on, but I guess that'll help as a little stopping point to restart the video. So that happened again. This wasn't really a conspiracy theory, it was just clumsiness. I dropped my mobile data device and it reset, so back on here. But let's go back to this. I know there's probably like 0 people up in here, but who cares? Let's roll.
To South Africa. So, you know, my experience is going to be based on the time that I lived in both of these countries. So I will begin with the UAE because that's where I spent most of my time in the Middle East. When I first got to the UAE, I lived in Ajman, and then I moved to Sharjah, and then finally I moved to Dubai, which is where I stayed the longest. So in the UAE, I lived in 3 different states. And you know how racism works in both the UAE and in Qatar is actually quite interesting. It's definitely not the type of racism where if you as a black person jump into the swimming pool, then everybody else automatically gets out. Or, you know, the type of racism where nobody wants to sit next to you in a bus or in a train. You know, even though that happens as well, but it's definitely not that type of racism that's common in both the UAE and in Qatar. The type of racism that you are most likely to experience, okay, is more of economic racism, all right? And I will explain exactly what I mean by that in just a second. So when I was living in Dubai, I experienced racism, but I also did not experience racism. So what I mean by that is I was discriminated against based on the fact that I was African, all right? So the type of job and the type of salary that I had, the compensation or the wages that I got was, you know, dependent on the fact that, or was based on the fact that I was African as opposed to what I brought to the table. Now, it is common practice to pay Africans and Asians less than, you know, Americans, Europeans, you know, Australians, you know, Western people basically. Now, even though Australia is in the southern hemisphere, all right, but it is pretty much a Western country. So that's how I experienced racism in the UAE, was the fact that I got wages based on the fact that I was African. You also need to remember that the majority of people that live in both the UAE and in Qatar are foreign nationals, all right? So if you do encounter racism, chances are it would be coming from somebody that is a foreigner like yourself, as opposed to it coming from a local. Now, not to say that locals aren't racist, all right, but statistically speaking, there are more foreign nationals in both of these countries than there are local people. So this ethnic discrimination, or being paid wages based on where you come from, it's not always as simple as it seems, because if you are African or Asian or come from a third world country, because usually those are people that are mostly victims of racism and discrimination, but if you have a Western passport, okay, you yourself will be paid like a Western person. I had plenty of friends that were Africans, but they had French passports, and they themselves were being paid like Western people. So it's not always about you being African or you being black. I am both black and African. I use those interchangeably, as it is about you being a Western person or having a Western passport.
So what he doesn't have the vocabulary to actually describe is what he's actually describing is xenophobia, right? So again, in root jurisdiction theory, I guess you could say, in my theory of root jurisdiction, theory of history, of racism. Sorry, I'm kind of sleepy. But what that means is it redefines everybody. So if you're outside of that root jurisdiction, if you're in another country, you can never experience racism, right? The only thing that you're experiencing in that situation is xenophobia at the highest level, right? So it seems like that's what it goes down to. But when he's talking about this wage disparities, that is a theme that comes up in American. But as he's developing this more, it just seems like it's xenophobia, which fits into the other model that I had for this. But I'm gonna let him talk because he's gonna go into something else, which is actually a side effect of racism.
Now, in terms of customer service, not being treated at a restaurant because I'm black, being followed around at a store because I'm black, that honestly never really happened to me. As far as customer service go, during my time in both the UAE and in Qatar, I had great customer service. Nobody, treated me badly as a customer because I was black. I was never not given excellent customer service because I was black. So on that front, okay, I definitely didn't experience racism. So that's basically the most common type of racism.
Somehow the video got out of sync with the audio. I have no idea why. So I'm upgrading it back to 720p.
In the UAE, it mostly has to do with wages. But there are obviously African people, black people with great careers who are making
And of course, it's gonna buffer as a result.
lots and lots of money. It doesn't mean just because you're either black or African or come from a third world country, then automatically you are going to have a difficult time in the UAE. That is not the case. You as an African person can be successful, but I will be honest and say that that type of discrimination is quite rampant, and literally nowhere else in the world is there a system where people in one country are paid wages based on where they come from. It literally doesn't happen anywhere else in the world besides the Middle East. So yes, it will definitely be, it definitely is challenging, and it's frustrating because we are both living in the same country, the same city, so it doesn't make sense, doesn't make sense for two people doing the exact same job, have the exact same qualifications, have the exact same number of years of experience, have the exact same education, being paid two different wages in one company. So moving to Qatar from the UAE was such a breeze for me.
Why is this thing
because,
buffering?
you know, living in Qatar was so much better than living in the UAE because I really struggled in Dubai. I'm gonna have to be honest. I really struggled. Even though I, as an individual, never really experienced any type of personal, I guess, direct racism, but the things that were happening to fellow Africans, you know, bothered me a lot, and it wasn't even the fact that I was being paid wages based on the fact that I was African, because I knew what I was getting myself into. I knew what I signed up for, all right? But how other Africans were being treated really affected me, whether they were not being paid, by their companies, or, their companies were holding them against their will. They would confiscate their passports so they couldn't go home.
Yeah, what he's describing.
There were just so many bad things that were happening to other African people, and it really used to affect me a lot. So much so that I began to have mental health issues.
Yeah.
Because I just could not take.
Yeah, like racism-induced generalized anxiety disorder. I would assume his symptoms would fall into that category. I would assume.
How bad.
Maybe a little bit of PTSD as well, depending on how traumatic his experiences were with those individuals who were dealing with those emotions on a raw level.
Exactly, other Africans were being treated, because there was a sense of community amongst us as African people. We all understood that we were not back home in Africa. We were all in a foreign country, foreign land. So we bonded on the fact that we were all foreigners in this country, So anytime something bad would happen to a fellow African, it really would affect me very, very badly. But I had to realize that, what, I can't carry the world's problems on my shoulders, right? Because even right here in South Africa, racism is very rampant in corporate South Africa. How many white secretaries with no education are being paid more than black graduates in corporate South Africa? So if I allow myself to be consumed by these stories, I would eventually. Africa, racism is very rampant in corporate South Africa. How many white secretaries with no education are being paid more than black graduates in corporate South Africa? So
and I've already brought up the little Senate document talking about the state of equality, or the state of equality of Black America 2020. I think that's the name of the paper, talking about him in this country, that in every single sector of educational levels for a job, a white person is getting paid more than the average black person. And in every single sector, stratifying wealth accumulation based off of education, white people have medians that are in certain cases 6 times to 7 times that of black people. So let's say you do get on your job and y'all do get paid the same amount of money, you and your white counterpart. That white person is stacking up money on a pile of money that's 6 times on average higher than yours. So what he's talking about is the global franchisation of white supremacy, that the same type of McDonald's fries with your white supremacy that you get in America is the same type of McDonald's fries with white supremacy you get in South Africa. So it's very interesting how that's working out.
So if I allow myself to be consumed by these stories, I would eventually go mad, So I had to realize that, while I can have empathy for my fellow African brothers and sisters, but I must not let it consume me, because I'll just go crazy. So when I moved to Qatar, it was definitely much easier for me to live there as opposed to Dubai. And I do actually prefer Qatar over the UAE, because Qatar, number one, is less developed. It's less commercially active. There's less people there, So the cost of living is not that expensive. So Qatar for me is definitely way better than in Dubai. Again, in Qatar, I never really experienced any type of personal racism where somebody was being unkind to me because I was black. It never really happened to me. The only type of racism that I experienced in both of these countries was the fact that I was being paid wages based on the fact that I was African. That's it.
Hmm. Again, that sounds like xenophobia to me, but that particular section. But this is the type of stuff that Tariq Nasheed is not doing while he's on vacation in Dubai. Hold up. This type of shit that he's not doing while he's on vacation in Dubai, right? He's not doing this type of, polling of the people in any of the countries that he's in. He doesn't really give a fuck. He's just doing his own little thing, right? Doing his own little thing. And people are giving him $400,000 in effect for him doing his own little thing. Like I said, I can't necessarily stop people from doing whatever they're going to do. They're going to do whatever the hell it is they're going to do. I honestly believe that this is going to go through and go forward, and angels from the sky with $100,000 donation levels are definitely going to come and save this out of the thin blue sky. But after this is concluded, this individual, I want to be able to say this because yeah, I think I am. I think what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to do a commercial associated with that little sound bite I have there, and highlight this individual for the hypocrite that he is. It may take me a few days because I want to make sure it's correct. But yeah, I'll be glad when this museum little campaign is over. If it goes on for another 30 days, I'll just take another 30 days to go at the situation. But once this campaign is over, Tariq Nasheed is dead to me so far as being a active member within, or not even a respected, of just being a member of this community. He's a non-factor in anybody's community. He has his own community of white people that he's associated with in my book, and he's over there and we're over here. Is my assessment. And anybody who has a different assessment, that's fine. You're entitled to your different assessment, but this individual has to stay far the hell away from me so far as any sort of intellectual thought. But anyways, this is the end of this. I'm glad I was able to maintain my emotions and not just randomly curse and destroy my mic without having a pop filter with all the P words. And I was going to say I'm glad I was able to avoid that. But yeah, this individual is definitely not somebody who should be a part of this community anymore. And those who are silent on his actions, just make sure you remain silent, because that will expose you even further.